Hello, I'm a Christ follower.
And I'm a Christian.
What you doing there?
Just getting ready for church. I've got my suit on, shirt pressed, shoes shined, and WWJD. And I've got my offering envelope in the front pocket here so everyone can see it.
I can see it, all right.
I am ready to go.
Yeah, well, you look spiffy.
Is that what you are wearing to church?
Well, yeah. I'm actually heading there right now. What, is there something wrong with what I'm wearing?
Oh, do you think Jesus would want you to wear that in his house of worship? Don't you think you should wear your Sunday best?
But today's Saturday.
I knew that. Do you really think Jesus would worship on a Saturday?
Actually, yeah, never mind.
Good morning, everybody. Isn't it festive in here? I mean, it's awesome when it's homecoming weekend, isn't it? So last week we started this 5-week series called Follow. And we're thinking about what it means to follow Jesus. And last week we started with the story of Matthew, a guy that Jesus invited to follow that nobody would have said, yeah, okay, that guy right there looks like one of the most likely people to impact the world in God's name. I mean, that guy looks like he could lead this incredible ministry. That guy, the kind of guy that could be one of the founding members of the Christian church. Nobody said that. Nobody said that about Matthew. Because when Jesus meets him, he's a mess. I mean, he's a tax collector. He's corrupt. He's a traitor. He's making a fortune by ruining people. And so last week we compared tax collectors in their culture to maybe drug lords in our culture. But here Jesus is, and he walks up to this guy and he invites him to follow, like to be in Jesus' inner circle, like one of his guys, a disciple. And the religious people are watching this and they're going crazy. They're like, you can't just accept somebody like that. And you definitely can't just casually go hang out at his house and have dinner and drink wine with him and all of his corrupt tax collector buddies. I mean, you can't just sit around and be with somebody like that. And Jesus basically responds by saying, look, I'm not running your religious program. I know Matthew is a mess. I know his friends are a mess. And if you remember, he says this right in front of them. And they're like, huh, yeah, we are a mess. And Jesus says it's not the healthy that need a doctor. Okay, it's the sick. He says, I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners. In other words, the approach that religious people always seem to have is change and you can join us. But Jesus' approach was, hey, just join us, as you are, join us and you will change. Just come be with me. Just come walk with me. Just come hang out with me. Just come see what I'm about. Let me show you how much I care about you. Watch how I live. Watch how I love. And see if you can hang out with me for very long before I start rubbing off on you. And so we drew 3 conclusions last week about following Jesus. Number 1, being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. It's a prerequisite. Jesus only invited sinners to follow him. In fact, the holier that people thought they were, the less inclined they were to follow Jesus. The people that knew they had issues, they were the ones that connected with Jesus. And so if you're a person that says, you know what, I don't think that I'd make a very good Christian. I'm not very holy. I got issues. Jesus would look at you and he'd say, good, you're perfect. Follow me. Number 2, being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. None of Jesus' earliest followers believed, not fully. So if you read the Gospels, if you read the 4 accounts of Jesus in the Bible, what you see is that none of these guys believed all the way at first. In fact, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we talked about this last week, it's crazy because they're 2 years into following Jesus. And Jesus does something, and then the text will say, and they believed. And again, you go, well, what were they doing before that? not believing, at least not all the way. They were wrestling. They were trying to figure things out. They were open, okay, but they didn't have everything all worked out. They weren't really sure what they believed, but they followed anyway. See, none of them had it all worked out when they started. But Jesus kept revealing stuff along the way, and their belief came to them gradually. So if you're a person that would say, I can't follow Jesus. I'm not even sure what I believe about Jesus. I just want to say, so what? I mean, you can't let that stop you. Because nobody ever starts out with this faith that's fully formed. Okay, third thing. The invitation is to relationship. It's to a relationship. Not to right beliefs and behaviors. And the reality of what Jesus is inviting us into is so much deeper, and it's so much richer, and it's so much more mysterious than rules. It's not just about what we believe and how we behave. It's about this life-giving relationship. Jesus says, I'm like a vine and you're like a branch. And if you stay connected to me, then I will pour my life into you. And so if you look at the lives of Christians that have actually been transformed, and I don't mean like on a superficial level, like they stopped smoking, awesome. I mean like from the inside out. I mean people with hearts filled with love and grace and compassion. They will tell you. They didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I need to be better, and so I have committed to fixing myself. It's not about that. It's never about that. What happened is that somehow they learned to connect with Jesus, and they entered into this sacred, mysterious, healing relationship. And then they messed up a lot. And they received a ton of grace over and over and over. But they stayed connected. And over time, their hearts started to get healed and they started to change. And of course, the million-dollar question is, well, how do you actually do that? Like, how do you have a relationship with Jesus? Because if you haven't noticed, he's invisible. So how do you have a relationship with someone that's invisible? And the hard part of all of this is if you're somebody that is, I've experienced this, you're on the I've experienced this side, you go, how do I explain that to somebody? This is really, really hard. Very difficult to explain. But what I want to do today is I want us to think about what leads to this. How people get from nothing, no faith, no relationship, into this connection to Jesus that gives life. And I want to say that in most cases, I think this is a way, way, way slower process than what we want to think about this, what we want to admit. And I think there are a whole lot of different pieces to this, and we want to make it about an instantaneous decision. I think it's much slower and it's much longer than that. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at another account of Jesus inviting someone to follow. In fact, a group of people to follow. And this particular account is portrayed in two different books in the Bible. And so if you're new to the Bible, if you're here and you're new to the Bible, you should know that there are 4 books in the Bible that are called Gospels. Okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they each tell the story of Jesus. But each book was written to communicate, in its original day, it was written to communicate to a different audience, to a particular audience. So each of them, as you can imagine, tells the story in a little bit different way. Now, some of the parts are very similar in all of them, but there are other parts where it gets different, and there's a lot of details that some have that others don't have. And this is sort of like you can get why this is. If there's a major world event that happens, you can watch the story on several different news channels, right? And some of what you're going to get will be the same on all the channels. But each of the channels will include, because they're telling a little bit different part of the story, they're telling it to a little bit different audience, they'll have just a few different details. They'll have things in their story that someone didn't have in the other story. They'll interview different eyewitnesses. They'll tell this from a different angle. And so the story that we're going to look at today is found in both Matthew and Luke. But they each had a different audience in mind, different angle. Matthew, just so we know right up front, Matthew was writing to Jewish people. He was writing to highly religious people, people that already had big faith. So Matthew doesn't take a lot of time to give us all the details. He just sort of gives us a brief synopsis of the account. And the problem is, okay, here's the problem. If you just read Matthew's version, you can be left with a very unrealistic picture of how a person begins to follow Jesus. And so what I want to do is, I want to read Matthew's version to you real quick, because I think a lot of you over the years have maybe read this, and you read it and you go like, what the heck? And maybe this story, as you read it, even freaked you out, and it left you feeling like, I don't know, that's because I could never do that. Okay, here it is. This is Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 20. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once, they left their nets and followed him. What? A guy walks up to you when you're working and says, "Hey, stop working and follow me." And you just like walk off the job? Okay, it gets worse. Going from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father, Zebedee, preparing the nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now, honestly, I mean, come on, honestly, that doesn't seem like spiritual. That seems irresponsible, doesn't it? Look, Dad, a guy with sandals. We're going with him. You know, good luck with the family business. Kiss Mom for us. Really? Like, who does that? What in the world happened? But Christians will sometimes sort of use this as the ultimate model of how you go about following Jesus. And maybe you've been in some Christian context somewhere where the presenter was like, "Hey, you need to accept Jesus and devote your entire life to him right now. Like, you need to turn everything over to him right now. Because if he is not Lord of all, he's not Lord at all." And maybe there's been a part of you in some of those contexts that goes, "Whoa, like, wait, because I am. Like, I'm really interested. I am. But I don't know that I can just, like, do that. But I really do want to know more. And I have some questions. But I have some doubts. And so, like, really? It's all or nothing right now? And so maybe you've been in a spot where it's like, well, I guess, like, I'm out then, because I'm not really ready for that. Okay, so if you've ever felt that way, I have some good news. Now, we just read, the story that we just read in Matthew is true, but it isn't the whole story. Okay, it's true. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying it's true. It's just not all of it. In Luke, we get the very same story, but Luke gives us a whole lot more details. Now, Matthew was primarily writing to devout Jews. Okay, very religious, very committed people to tell them about Jesus. People that had been worshiping God their whole life. People that already had big faith. Luke wasn't a Jew, and he wasn't writing to Jews. Okay, he was writing to Gentiles. He was writing to people like you and me that didn't grow up with a big faith. People who would say, you know what, I need a little more information before I say bye to mom and dad and just walk off and leave everything. Okay, now before we get to Luke's account of this story, let me set the scene. This whole encounter takes place around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, it's also known as the Lake of Tiberias or the Lake of Gennesaret. Okay, it's referred to, you come across it in the Bible 3 different ways, it's the same thing. Okay, so it's this huge freshwater lake, but it is massive and it is deep. And it's cool because you can actually even right now fly over there and go see it. And I have an image of it. And so if you go to Israel, you can rent a boat, and like they would have used in Jesus' day, and you can go out on the Sea of Galilee. And Christians do this all the time. It's pretty much only Christians that do this. But We do it all the time. And it's so cool because this is the place where so much of the stuff with Jesus went down, and you're just sitting out there. And so several years ago, I actually had a chance to go with a group. A pastor friend of mine called and said that somebody in the group canceled, and so for virtually nothing, if I could clear my schedule, I could go on this trip with them. So we did, and I went. And we rented one of these boats that looked a whole lot like that, and we went out there. And we watched the sun set while sitting on a boat like that on the Sea of Galilee. And it was by far and away the coolest part of that entire trip for me. The only thing that detracted from it was this horrific touristy part of the whole thing. The guides that own the boat, and this is big business. This is a huge racket for them. Okay, and they're probably not even Christians. But they can make a lot of money if they can get their hands on one of these boats. So we would go out there on one of these boats with these guys that barely speak English, and they make a living taking Christian groups out. And you could tell, because they were working the tip. It was amazing. It's such a racket. So we go out there, and you have this rustic boat like this, but it's got a CD player on it. And so the sun is setting, and it's like this almost magical moment. And I was like, to be honest with you, I was kind of transported. I'm looking at the hills and imagining Jesus feeding people and teaching, and all of that was just incredible. But the guides, they're working the tip. So they turn on the CD player. They want to like heighten our experience. So what would you imagine in a moment like that you would play? Maybe Amazing Grace. Maybe How Great Thou Art. Maybe Chris Tomlin, because all Christians like Chris Tomlin. No. They're going to do something so much more powerful than that. They put on the U.S. national anthem, and they raised a flag on the American flag on the bow of the bow of the boat. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, this is killing it. I was in shock. Really? Really, this is what you think about Americans, that we want to come out on the Sea of Galilee and have a flag up and sing national anthem? And what was even worse was that people in our group did it. They stood up, looked at the flag, covered their heart, and sang the national anthem. My goodness. And so I guess in these kinds of situations, every guide sort of has their moneymaker. And I heard another story about another guide that was out with a group of people and took a bottle of water and took it out and was like, hey, watch this. And he poured water on the deck. And then he said to the group, okay, who wants to come up here and walk on the water on the Sea of Galilee? And apparently, people in this group did it. They were really into it. They're like, wow, yeah, we're walking on the water, baby. Okay, so today, you can actually go there and you can walk on water if you want. Now, that's the context for the story. Here's Luke's version, okay? This is Luke chapter 5, verse 1. Same story, a few more details. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, okay, the Sea of Galilee, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. Huh. So there's more to the story. Before he talks to these guys, Jesus is actually at the shoreline preaching. And these fishermen are hearing Jesus teach. They're listening to the sermon. Okay, there's more here. And this brings us to an important point. Following Jesus always begins with information. Following Jesus always begins with listening. It doesn't begin with leave your world and leave your life. It begins with information. It begins with listening. It begins with content. And this is a really, really big deal. Because if you ever find yourself in a community of Christians that says, hey, don't ask questions, you just got to believe. Okay, you need to run away. Because real faith, real Christian, solid Christian faith is built on truth. And it can stand up to questions. It can. And it can handle discussion. It's built on teaching, and it's built on learning, and it's built on listening. Genuine faith is never, ever, ever blind faith. And Jesus would build people's faith through teaching, through information. And that's what he's doing in this scene. So people are crowding around Jesus at the edge of the water, and it's really difficult. The crowd is growing so huge that it's hard for everyone to hear. And Jesus is being kind of pressed backwards, and his sandals are getting wet, you know. So, verse 2. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. So here's what would go on. The fishermen would fish at night, or they would fish very early in the morning, like before dawn, before the sun came up. And when they were done, when they'd finished all this, they would stretch their nets out like between a couple of poles, and they would let them dry, and they would get all the debris out of there, you know, all the Bud Light cans and the sunglasses and all that stuff. And then they would, when they were dried, they'd roll them up and they would store them until the next time they went out. Okay, so you get the picture in your mind. As these guys are cleaning their nets, they're listening to Jesus preach on the shoreline. They're working and they're listening. They're working and they're listening. They're working and they're listening. And Jesus sees their boat sitting there. Okay, verse 3. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, okay, Peter, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Oh. So Peter's been listening to Jesus as he cleans his nets, and he's very interested. Like he's gripped by all of this. And then Jesus turns to him and he says, "Hey, Peter, could I inconvenience you for a second? Could I borrow your boat? Could I just a small inconvenience? Could I borrow your boat?" And which would mean that you need to hang around here until I'm done teaching before you go home for the day. So would you just sort of hang out here and maybe sit out in the boat with me as I teach? That'd be all right? And Peter does. And he hangs out there and he listens to more of Jesus' teaching. Okay, verse 4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." So Jesus finishes teaching, and the crowd is sort of meandering away, and he turns to Peter. And really, at this point, he could have said anything, right? I mean, he could have said, "Hey, did you like my teaching?" "Well, yeah." "All right, well, then leave your family and follow me." I mean, at this point, at least Peter has a little bit of information, right? But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Instead, he asks Peter to go back out fishing and drop the nets. And there are 2 problems with this. And the first one is obvious. Okay, it's Peter's got to be Jesus, maybe you haven't been paying attention. We just cleaned and dried our nets. That's a huge job. So you don't go back out after you do that. That's you don't go 4-bying and then come home and spend hours washing your truck just to go right back out 4-bying again. And he's like, "Jesus, we're tired. I mean, we've been working all night and we're done for today. It's time to punch out and go home." Okay? We just cleaned our nets. We're not gonna head back out to the deep water. Are you kidding? Second problem. You don't fish during the daytime. You don't catch fish during the daytime. They fished at night because that's when the water cools. Okay, and this is deep, deep water. And so the fish would come up. But then when the water warms, fish go down again. And they're fishing with shallow nets. Okay? So they've been fishing all night. They've been fishing when you're supposed to fish. And they've caught nothing. So they've cleaned and they've dried their nets, and they're about to go home empty-handed, and Jesus comes along and he says, "Hey, let's go fishing when you're not supposed to go fishing. I want you to do something that you've done 1,000 times, but I want you to do it differently. I want you to do it my way. I'm not asking you to leave your family and leave behind the family business. I'm just asking you to do something, one thing different one time. What do you say?" Now imagine you're Peter. It's "Okay, Rabbi. Yeah, you can preach. There's no doubt about that. Like, that really was amazing teaching, but clearly you don't know jack about fish. So here, how about this? You stick to preaching and let us professionals catch the fish, okay? And besides, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like a huge crowd that's gathered over here. And so like if I go out in the middle of the day and they see me out there in the middle of the day, they're going to think I'm crazy. So the decision comes down to trust. Will Peter trust Jesus? And look at how Peter responds, verse 5. Simon answered, Master, which is a very polite way of addressing him. Cordial, but not significant, polite. Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Wow. Now, I don't know why Peter said yes, but I'll give you my guess. My guess is that when Peter heard Jesus preach, it was like nothing else he'd ever heard. There was something very different about it, and it was powerful, and it rang true to him. And so Jesus, because Peter had listened to him, Jesus had earned just a little bit of credit with Peter. Just enough for Peter to be willing to try this crazy thing. Okay, now imagine what hung in the balance of Peter's decision to take Jesus fishing. I mean, the reason that we even know who Peter is because in that moment, he decided, okay, like, I guess this isn't that big a deal. I'm going to trust Jesus, and I'm going to do something that I've done 1,000 times differently. I'm going to do it the way Jesus is asking me to do it. Now, for some of you, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but this is exactly where you are. You've been listening for a while, and you've been impacted by his teaching. And you sense him nudging you to do something in your life a little bit different. And like Peter, you really have no idea what hangs in the balance. I mean, like, okay, imagine if we could, like, if in that moment with Peter, Jesus could have just, like, dropped a screen and said, Peter, take me fishing. Because if you take me fishing, look what'll happen. And Peter's like, what's that? Jesus says, well, that's your tomb. It's called St. Peter's Basilica. And guess what? You're St. Peter. I am? Yeah, you are. You're going to be St. Peter, and you're going to be buried right there. And this, like, monstrosity of a building is going to be built right over where you're buried to commemorate you. It's going to be incredible. Right over where you're buried. I mean, Peter, like, take a look inside there. I mean, look at that thing. Have you ever seen anything like it? I mean, can you get a feel for the expanse of that? Peter, this is like the miracle of the Renaissance. It's going to take them 120 years to build this bad boy. And it's going to be named for you. So, will you take me fishing? And of course, that didn't happen. Because Peter, like you and me, had no idea of what hung in the balance. Jesus was asking him, Peter, I want you to do something new, something different. And I know you're resistant, and I know that it doesn't make perfect sense to you right now, but will you do it just because I'm asking you to? Will you trust me? Peter says yes. And look at what happens. Verses 6 to 11. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they both began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord." Not just master anymore, now he's Lord. Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Now, that's a little more information than Matthew gave us. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that happened with Jesus before they made the decision to leave their nets and follow. Okay, there was this natural progression that they walked through. And I think that this is very much the same natural progression that we all walk through. Because people don't just go from no faith to, I'm going to leave everything behind. And in this story, we sort of see 4 phases of follow. We see every element that's involved in following Jesus. And I think that every one of us could describe ourselves as being at one of these 4 places. So for some of you, you're simply at the sit and listen phase. For you, what you need to do is sit and listen. You need information. You need to hear what this is all about. You need content. And so just by being here, you've already taken a huge step. Following Jesus always begins with information. Following Jesus always begins with listening, begins with content. Christianity is an informed faith. It's not a blind faith. And it always starts with content, with information, with listening. And so some of you, just by being here, you right now are in the sit and listen phase. And the thing that you need to do is to just keep listening. You need content. You need more content. So for the next step, maybe the next step for you is simply to come back next week, or the week after that, or the week after that, maybe all 3. Or maybe for you, the next step is to read that book that your friend gave you and said, I think that this would encourage you. I think that this is right where you are. Maybe you need to take it off the shelf and and read that thing. Maybe the next step for you is to ask a lot of questions, to talk to that friend who's been eager to talk to you about this stuff, to say, you know what, rather than resisting you, I'm inviting you to go to coffee. Let's sit down and talk. You're not ready to leave everything and follow, and why would you be? But keep listening, because that's where you are right now. That's the phase that you're in, and so engage it, fully engage it. Others of you are more in the loan him the boat phase. Because after Peter listened and he got some information, Jesus said, can I inconvenience you to borrow your boat? Will you sacrifice just a little bit more of your time? Hang out here a little longer. Let me use your stuff and let me use a little bit of your time before you leave for the day. Would you just give me a little bit? And some of you, you've been in a spot where you've been listening for a while, and it's impacting you. There's something that happens in your heart that you can't explain when you hear the words of Jesus. And the truth is, it's time for you to take the next step, to maybe sit down with some other people and start talking about faith, to maybe join a life group where people gather weekly to read and to study and to talk and to ask questions and to help each other. And maybe you've been here before and you've heard us talk about this and you've sort of been, you've thought about it, but you've just resisted. You thought, well, that would take some time. And so I don't know if I want to commit to every week, because there are probably going to be weeks where that would be inconvenient. But what if that's what you really need? And all of our groups are just getting started, they're a week or 2 into it for the fall. This is a great time to start. It's a great time to start. And for the next few weeks, here's what everybody's talking about. This sermon series. So if you're sitting here going, I got questions and I got thoughts and I'd like to raise my hand right now, but I'm not going to do that because that would be embarrassing for me and awful and they might kick me out. I don't know what would happen. You don't want to do that in here, but you should do that in there. And everybody needs to have an environment where they can do that. And so after this series is done, all those groups will branch off and kind of do their own thing, and they'll all decide what they're going to do. But maybe you could start by making a small commitment. Like just try a weekly gathering for a few months, discussing, hanging out, asking questions. And if you're interested in that and you just want to know more about when those groups are, or if that would even work for you, get more information on it, just mark your communication card. Just say, I'm interested in a life group, and we will get a hold of you this week and get you going as quickly as we can on that. Or maybe you need to stretch yourself in some other way. Like maybe joining a group isn't doable for you right now, and for some of you, logistically, it's not doable. But maybe you know of some other way to take a step. Maybe there's like a Bible study at work. Or maybe you could sacrifice a little time and ask a trusted friend not just to meet with you once, but to meet with you regularly. But it's time for you to just like step out a little bit. Start giving Jesus a little more. Okay, others of you would find yourself at the take him fishing phase. And this one is like exciting and it's scary all at the same time. And this is where Jesus is asking you to trust him and do something. Might have something to do with your relationships. Maybe it's got something to do with your profession. Maybe it's got something to do with how you're handling finances. Maybe it's taking a new risk in some way. But it's doing something new or doing something different that you've been resisting and it scares you. And here's how you know what it is. You've been coming here for a while and you've been listening and you've been thinking and you're taking it all in. But every once in a while when you're praying, or every once in a while when you're listening, or every once in a while when your mind just sort of tunes out, there's something inside of you that's going on and you think, you know what, I really need to, I need to begin, I really need to stop, I really need to start. It's not an audible voice or anything like that. But it's like, it's almost as if your conscience has been tuned into something that it just wasn't tuned into before. Because that thing never bothered you before. Never really considered that before. But now you are, and you can't seem to get it out of your mind. There's a change that you need to make. Now, it's not like change your whole life. It's just change this one thing. But it's as if God's talking to you. And you have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision. But you've listened long enough, and you've learned long enough, and you've had enough of your questions answered to know, you know what, I think there's something to this. And so this decision that's facing you now is really at the epicenter of what God wants to do in your life. And he's beckoning you to take him fishing. And you have no idea what hangs in the balance. I mean, Jesus is saying to you, like, follow me. Like, come on. I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm not asking you to leave everything behind. I just want to show up in your life. Because when your itty-bitty, tiny baby faith intersects with my faithfulness, then you're going to encounter me. And then when that happens, you're going to realize, oh God, like you knew my name. That was you that was banging on my heart. You cared about me enough to pursue me and to speak to me like this is real. You're real, like that was you. And your life will be different. Because you will have done, maybe for the very first time in a specific way, you will have done something that Jesus has invited you to do. And the cool thing is, I don't have to tell you what it is. Because you already know. And you've been scared. And you've been resisting. Maybe you've been saying no. But it's the next phase for you to follow. And then the fourth phase is just the leave your nets phase. I mean, you sit and listen long enough to start being inconvenienced. And you start giving Jesus a little time. You start giving him some resources. And then you sense him asking you to do something. And you do it. And he meets you there. And so you do it again. And again. and again. And he keeps working. He keeps meeting you in these places. And you've had plenty of these experiences. And so it's time. Like now, it's time for you to say, you know what, God? I'm going to give you like my whole life. Take everything. I want to stop playing around. Playing this like, okay, God, you can have this, but not this. Okay, now, God, you can have this, but not this. I'm going to quit playing that game. And some of you are in a place where you just need to quit playing that game. And you've seen enough to know. You have seen enough to know how good Jesus is. And he's shown you his faithfulness over and over and over. And it's just time for you to say, Jesus, I'm giving you everything. Okay, I'm going to give you all of it. Okay, now the point is not, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea, the point is not for you to kind of look at this and grade yourself. It isn't like, phase 1, that's like the little itty-bitty baby faith. And phase 2 is where you finally, take the thumb out of your mouth. And phase 3 is, okay, that's not how this is. The point isn't to rank yourself. The point isn't to grade yourself. The issue is simply this. Are you willing to take the next step? The issue is, what's the next step? Take it. What's the next step from there? Take it. Then what's the next step? And you take it. And this is why this is such a big deal. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision. But it's in the balance of your decision that determines for you how real God is for you. This is how your faith comes alive. It's doing and then doing and then doing that makes the difference in terms of your actual experience with Jesus. And so whatever the next step is in terms of following, whatever the next step is, you need to take it. Because you don't want to spend your life wondering what Jesus would have done with you and through you and in you if you had said yes. You don't want to spend another season wandering around wondering, like, hey, where is God? And how come God won't reveal himself to me? Because it turns out that the issue was never God. It was your unwillingness to say yes to the next simple step. To keep listening. To just keep listening and keep listening and keep listening. Or to be inconvenienced in some way and start moving in a new direction. Or to take this risk that you know God wants you to take. The voice has been telling you there's something inside of you that tells you, you need to start this, you need to stop this, you need to change this, you need to take a risk. Like, how do we have a relationship with an invisible God? I can't really explain that. But here's what I know. We take the next step, and then we watch him reveal himself. And it's the most amazing thing, because then we find that Jesus is like a vine, and we're like a branch, and when we stay connected to him, he starts pouring life into us. And I'm telling you, you don't want to miss it. So whatever it is for you, take the next step. All right, God, I thank you so much. I thank you so much for the way that you don't put barriers in front of us in terms of following you. You're always busting through those barriers and reaching out to us patiently and graciously and saying, all right, here's my hand. Take it and come to the next place with me. And God, I pray for anyone here this morning that as we've been talking about this, something is coming to mind and they're like, I know what I need to do. I know what I need to do. God, I pray that you would just strengthen them. I pray that you would encourage them. I pray that you would not stop knocking on the door of their heart, that you would just pound on that sucker until you break through and they say, yes, I'm going to do this. Because there's too much at stake for us to have this invitation to you, from you, for the next thing and just dismiss it and walk away. Help us all to say yes to the next thing, whatever it is. And to encounter you on the other side of it. And for you to then show us the next thing and for us to take that step. And on and on and on until our hearts come alive and we understand who you are and we're in relationship with you, a relationship that we can't really even explain to others. Give us life. We need you. In Jesus' name, amen.